There is a photograph that lives somewhere in the archives of the New York Rangers, taken on a night in June of 1994, inside Madison Square Garden. In this photograph, a man stands at center ice. His jersey is soaked through with sweat and champagne. His face is contorted into something between agony and ecstasy, a kind of release that only comes when you have carried something impossibly heavy for an impossibly long time, and you have finally, mercifully, set it down. The man is Mark Messier. The trophy in his hands is the Stanley Cup, and the weight he had been carrying was not merely his own. It belonged to an entire city. 54 years. That is how long New York had waited. 54 years since the Rangers last hoisted Lord Stanley's Cup. A drought so long and so painful that it had become more than a losing streak. It had become an identity. Rangers fans did not merely expect to lose. They had internalized it. The curse was not something whispered in dark bars after bad losses. It was printed on T-shirts. It was chanted in opposing arenas. 1940. That was the year engraved on every Rangers fan's broken heart. Visiting fans would chant it like a taunt, a two-word summary of the entire franchise's futility. And in that half-century of waiting, the franchise had seen great players come and go. Rod Gilbert, Andy Bathgate, Eddie Giacomin, Jean Rattel, Brad Park. Players good enough to be remembered, skilled enough to thrill, but never quite enough to end the drought. The Rangers endured collapses and near misses and heartbreaks that would have destroyed lesser fan bases. But the cup never came home. Then Mark Messier arrived. He came to New York in the fall of 1991, traded from the Edmonton Oilers, the only hockey dynasty of the 1980s, where he had already won 5 Stanley Cups. 5. He had nothing left to prove for himself. His legacy was already secure. His name was already engraved on the cup 5 times over. He could have spent his remaining years in Edmonton, padding his statistics, enjoying the comfort of familiarity, accepting the gratitude of a city that already adored him. But something about New York called to him. Something about the challenge of lifting a franchise from the ashes of its own mythology appealed to the part of Messier that was not merely a great hockey player, but something closer to a force of nature. He did not come to New York to play out the string. He came to win. He said so publicly, he said so privately, and the conviction in his voice when he said, it was the kind of conviction that makes reasonable people stop and listen. And 3 years later, in the spring of 1994, with his team down 3-2 in the Eastern Conference Finals against the New Jersey Devils, with the entire season hanging by a thread, with every voice in the hockey world preparing the Rangers' obituary, Mark Messier did something that no athlete should ever do. He made a promise. He guaranteed a victory. He looked into the cameras and told the world that his team would win Game 6. In professional sports, guarantees are dangerous. They are reckless. They invite humiliation. They give the opponent bulletin board material. They create expectations that, when unmet, become the defining memory of a career rather than its footnote. But Messier was not being reckless. He was being precise. He knew what he was capable of. He knew what his teammates were capable of. And he knew that the only thing standing between the Rangers and survival was the belief that survival was possible. In Game 6, trailing 3-2 in the third period, facing elimination on the road in New Jersey, Messier scored 3 goals, a natural hat trick, 3 consecutive goals by the same player, all in the final period, all when the alternative was the end of the season. He willed his team back from the dead with the kind of performance that transcends sport and enters something closer to myth. He did not merely play well. He took the game by the collar and dragged it to the outcome he had promised. And when the final horn sounded and the Rangers had won, the guarantee had been fulfilled, the promise was kept, and the legend of Mark Messier grew beyond anything the hockey world had ever seen. That is the image most people carry of Mark Messier. The guarantee, the hat trick, the cup raised overhead in 1994. But the full story is so much deeper than a single series, a single game, a single moment of defiance. The full story stretches back to the frozen ponds of Western Canada, to a father who played professional hockey and raised his son to understand that toughness was not optional. It stretches to a teenage prodigy who joined the World Hockey Association at 17 years old. a boy playing a man's game in a league that had no patience for weakness. It stretches to a young man who stood in the shadow of the greatest player who ever lived, and somehow, through sheer force of will and an intensity that bordered on the terrifying, became indispensable to the greatest dynasty of his era. The full story includes moments of brutality and tenderness, of dominance and vulnerability, of a leader who demanded everything from those around him because he first demanded everything from himself. By the end of tonight, you are going to understand why Mark Messier is not simply remembered as one of the greatest hockey players of all time. You are going to understand why he is remembered as the greatest leader the sport has ever produced. You are going to understand what it costs a man to carry a team, a franchise, and an entire city on his back. And you are going to understand why, decades later, when people speak of captains and leadership and what it truly means to refuse to lose, the conversation always, inevitably, returns to number 11. Before we get started, if you find these stories as moving as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more people who appreciate the legends of the game. Now let us begin. To understand what Mark Messier accomplished, you first have to understand what the Stanley Cup means, not what it represents in the abstract, not the general idea of winning a championship, but the specific, almost spiritual weight of this particular trophy, because there is nothing else like it in professional sports. Nothing that even comes close. And the traditions that surround this trophy, the rituals and the superstitions, and the sheer emotional gravity of its pursuit, form the backdrop against which every great hockey story is told. The Stanley Cup was donated in 1893 by Lord Stanley of Preston, who served as the Governor-General of Canada. He purchased it for roughly $50, which, even adjusting for the era, was a modest sum. It was a silver bowl mounted on a decorative base, and he intended it to be awarded annually to the best amateur hockey club in the Dominion of Canada. That was the beginning. A simple trophy for a simple purpose. What it became is something Lord Stanley could never have imagined. Over the decades, the cup evolved from a regional prize into the most coveted trophy in North American professional sports. It is the oldest professional sports trophy on the continent. It predates the World Series by a decade. It predates the founding of the National Football League by nearly 3 decades. It predates the National Basketball Association by more than half a century. It has been awarded, with few exceptions, every year since 1893. And unlike every other major championship trophy in North American sports, there is only one. The Stanley Cup is not remade each year. It is not replaced. It is not retired to a museum while a replica travels in its place. The cup itself, the actual physical object, is passed from champion to champion, hand to hand, year after year, decade after decade. When the bands that encircle its base are full, the oldest band is removed and placed in the Hockey Hall of Fame, making room for new names. But the cup itself endures. The names of every player on every championship team are engraved on its surface. When you touch the Stanley Cup, you are touching the same metal that was touched by Howie Morenz in the 1920s, by Maurice Richard in the 1950s, by Bobby Orr in the 1970s, by Wayne Gretzky in the 1980s. The continuity is unbroken, the lineage is real, and that lineage gives the cup a weight that transcends its 35 pounds of silver and nickel alloy. This matters because winning the Stanley Cup is not merely about being the best team in a given season. It is about joining a bloodline. It is about having your name etched into an object that connects you to more than a century of history. It is about standing in a line that stretches back to the very origins of organized hockey and forward into a future that has not yet been written. Players have described the experience of lifting the cup in terms that border on the sacred. Grown men, hardened by years of professional combat on the ice, break down in tears when they first hold it. They speak of the weight of it in hushed tones, and they do not mean the physical weight, though that is substantial. They mean the emotional weight, the historical weight, the accumulated significance of every player who has ever held it before them. When a player hoists the Stanley Cup over his head, he is not simply celebrating a victory. He is performing a ritual that has been performed for more than 130 years. He is joining a fraternity that spans generations, and the path to that ritual is the most punishing in professional sports. The NHL playoff format requires a team to win 4 best-of-7 series. That means a team must win 16 games to claim the cup. But that number is misleading in its simplicity. The journey takes approximately 2 months of the most physically demanding competition in all of team sports. Each round is a war of attrition. The games are played at a level of intensity that the regular season cannot approach. Hits are harder, shots are blocked more frequently. Goalkeepers play with a desperation that elevates their performance beyond anything they show during the 82-game regular season. And the toll on the body is extraordinary. Injuries mount with each passing round. Bodies break down in ways that are both visible and hidden. Broken fingers are taped together and ignored. Separated shoulders are injected with painkillers and played through. Torn ligaments are wrapped and stabilized enough to allow skating, but not enough to allow walking without pain the next morning. By the time a team reaches the Stanley Cup Final, its players are playing through damage that would keep ordinary people bedridden for weeks. The stories that emerge after each cup run are staggering in their detail. Players who competed with broken feet, players who had bones in their faces fractured by deflected pucks and continued playing with protective cages attached to their helmets, players who could not lift their arms above their shoulders but took the ice shift after shift because the alternative was letting down the men beside them. The playoff beard tradition, where players stop shaving for the duration of the postseason, is more than superstition. It is a visual marker of suffering and solidarity. The longer the beard, the longer the war. And when you see a team lifting the cup in June, with their faces hidden behind 2 months of unshaved growth, their bodies held together by tape and cortisone and sheer will, you are seeing men who have paid a price that most human beings will never comprehend. The tradition of each player spending a day with the cup during the off-season began informally and became institutionalized over time. A keeper of the cup, an official representative of the Hockey Hall of Fame, accompanies the trophy at all times during these visits. The cup has traveled to every continent on Earth. It has been taken to military bases and hospitals, to mountaintops and small fishing villages, to the hometowns of players from countries where hockey is barely known. It has been filled with champagne at victory parties. It has been filled with cereal at breakfast tables. There are stories of players filling it with baptismal water for their newborn children, wanting their babies to begin life inside the same vessel that held the names of legends. These stories have become their own mythology, layered on top of the hockey mythology, creating a cultural artifact that is as much about the human experience of triumph and ritual as it is about any single sport. The cup has had its share of misadventures as well. It has been left on the side of a road after a player forgot it on the roof of his car. It has been dropped into swimming pools. It has spent time sitting at the bottom of Mario Lemieux's pool in Pittsburgh while party guests dove down to touch it. It has been dented and repaired, lost and found. It has been carried through airports and checked into hotel rooms. Each story adds another layer to the legend, and the legend makes the pursuit of the cup even more consuming for those who have never won it. The cup is not merely a prize to be claimed. It is a character in the story of hockey, with its own history and its own personality. And the players who seek it are not merely competing for a championship. They are chasing an object that has taken on a life of its own. For franchises that have been denied the cup for long stretches, the drought becomes a defining feature of their identity. It becomes part of the culture of the organization and the city it represents. The Chicago Blackhawks went 49 years between cups, from 1961 to 2010. During that drought, entire generations of Chicago hockey fans were born, grew up, raised families, and grew old without ever seeing their team win the ultimate prize. The Boston Bruins went 39 years, from 1972 to 2011. The St. Louis Blues waited 51 years from their founding in 1967 before winning their first cup in 2019. The Toronto Maple Leafs have not won since 1967, a drought that has stretched across nearly 6 decades and counting. These droughts are not mere statistics to be noted and moved past. They are wounds, They are generational traumas passed from parent to child. Each new season beginning with fragile hope and ending with familiar grief. The pain is real and it is cumulative. Each year without a cup makes the next year's disappointment sharper because it carries not just the weight of that single season's failure, but the accumulated weight of every season that came before it. And no drought in modern hockey history was more famous, more painful, or more seemingly permanent than the New York Rangers drought, which stretched from 1940 to 1994. 54 years. To put that in perspective, when the Rangers last won the Cup in 1940, the world was on the brink of the Second World War. Television did not yet exist as a consumer medium in North America. The NHL had only 6 teams, the so-called Original Six: Montreal, Toronto, Detroit, Chicago, Boston, and New York. When the Rangers finally won again in 1994, the Cold War had ended, the internet was emerging as a transformative technology, the Berlin Wall had fallen 5 years prior, and the NHL had expanded to 26 teams playing in cities from Anaheim to Miami. The world had changed completely. The Rangers had not changed at all. They were still waiting. The curse, as Rangers fans called it, had a specific origin story in franchise lore. After winning the Cup in 1940, the ownership of Madison Square Garden reportedly burned the mortgage on the building inside the Cup's bowl, celebrating the arena's financial freedom by turning the most sacred trophy in hockey into a receptacle for ashes. According to legend, this act of disrespect angered the hockey gods and the franchise was cursed. The Cup would not return to New York until the sin was atoned for. It was a myth, of course, a folk tale told to explain the inexplicable. Bad teams and bad management and bad luck and bad timing do not require supernatural explanations. But myths have power, especially when they are sustained and reinforced across decades. And for 54 years, the myth of the curse gave Rangers fans a narrative framework for their suffering. It was not merely human failure, it was cosmic punishment. And cosmic punishment, by definition, cannot be overcome by ordinary means. It requires something extraordinary. It requires someone extraordinary. The Stanley Cup tradition also shaped the kind of player who could thrive in the postseason. Regular season excellence is one thing. Plenty of players compile impressive statistics over 82 games when the stakes are relatively low and the schedule allows for rest and recovery. Playoff excellence is something entirely different. The history of hockey is littered with talented players who dominated during the regular season but disappeared when the stakes were highest. The pressure of elimination games, the increased physical punishment, the scrutiny of every shift, the knowledge that a single mistake could end a season and send everyone home, these factors separate the great from the truly legendary. The term clutch is overused in sports, diluted by casual application to every big play and dramatic moment. But in hockey, in the context of a cup run, clutch carries a specific and almost measurable meaning. Clutch players score when elimination looms. They block shots when their bodies are screaming. They deliver devastating hits when the other team is trying to intimidate. They do not shrink when the moment grows. They expand. Mark Messier was the ultimate embodiment of this playoff tradition. His regular season numbers were excellent by any standard. Over his career, he scored 694 goals and recorded 1,193 assists for a total of 1,887 points, placing him second on the all-time NHL scoring list at the time of his retirement. He trailed only Wayne Gretzky, and trailing only Gretzky in any statistical category is an achievement rather than a shortcoming. Those are Hall of Fame numbers. But it was in the playoffs where Messi became something more than a great player. He became a legend. In postseason play, he recorded 295 points in 236 games. He won 6 Stanley Cups, 5 with Edmonton and 1 with New York. He was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the playoffs in 1984. He won the Hart Trophy as the NHL's most valuable player twice, in 1990 and 1992. But the statistics, as impressive as they are, do not capture what made Messier different from every other great player who ever laced up skates. What made Messier different was the way he imposed his will on the game. when the game mattered most. It was the look in his eyes during overtime of an elimination game, a look that communicated, without words, that he was not going to allow his team to lose. It was the way his teammates straightened up, almost involuntarily, when he walked into the locker room before a big game. It was the way opposing players, men who were themselves among the toughest and most talented athletes on the planet, gave him an extra half step of space on the ice, because they knew from experience what happened to those who did not. The Stanley Cup demands sacrifice. It demands suffering. It demands that a player give everything he has and then find something more to give when the well is dry. The cup does not reward the most talented. It rewards the most relentless. And in the entire history of the NHL, spanning more than a century of competition, no player was more relentless than Mark Messier. His teammates did not follow him because he was skilled. They followed him because he made them believe, through the sheer volcanic force of his presence, that losing was not an option. He inspired through action, through the way he played every shift as if it were the last shift of his life, through the ferocity of his compete level. Messier's compete level was not human, it was something else entirely, something primal and ancient and beyond measurement. There is a reason the NHL's award for leadership is named after him. The Mark Messier Leadership Award, established in 2007, is given annually to the player who exemplifies great leadership qualities. Other players have trophies named after statistical categories. Messier has a trophy named after the quality that defined him most. Not his shot, not his speed, not his hands, his leadership. That distinction is the most meaningful tribute the sport has ever paid to any individual player. And it was this quality that made him the man who could break the curse. Because the Rangers did not need a superstar in 1991. They needed someone who could change the way an entire organization thought about itself. Someone who could walk into a locker room weighed down by 51 years of failure and say, with absolute credibility, that the failure was going to end. Someone who knew, and that someone was Mark Messier. But to understand how he became the man who could carry that weight, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to a small city in Western Canada, to a family that bled hockey, and to a boy who learned before he learned anything else, that the game demanded everything you had, and then demanded even more. Mark John Douglas Messier was born on January 18, 1961, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He was born into hockey the way some people are born into a family business. There was no question about whether he would play. The only question was how far his talent and his will could take him. His father, Doug Messier, was a professional hockey player who spent years in the minor leagues, a tough, hard-nosed defenseman who understood the game not as entertainment but as labor, hard, punishing, unglamorous labor. Doug Messier never made it to the NHL. He came close, spending time in the Western Hockey League and other minor circuits. But close is a word that haunts thousands of hockey players across the decades. The gap between the minors and the NHL is measured in fractions of ability, but feels like an ocean to those who fall on the wrong side of it. What Doug did instead was something that may have been more important in the long arc of hockey history than any career he might have had as a player. He became a coach, and his most important student, the one who would fulfill the dream that eluded the father, was his eldest son. Growing up in the Edmonton suburb of St. Albert, young Mark was immersed in hockey from the moment he could stand on skates. The Messier household was not one where hockey was a hobby or a weekend pastime. It was a vocation. It was the organizing principle of family life. Doug coached local teams, and Mark was always there, watching from the stands or from behind the bench, absorbing not just the mechanics of skating and shooting, but the deeper architecture of the game, how shifts in momentum work, how a single act of courage can change the energy of an entire locker room, how the willingness to sacrifice your body can inspire the man skating beside you. But it was not just the tactical aspects of the game that Doug imparted. It was the mentality. Doug Messier believed that hockey was a test of character above all else, that the ice did not care about your talent if you did not have the courage to use it when the game was hard. That toughness, both physical and mental, was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Without toughness, skill was decoration. With toughness, even modest skill could become formidable. This philosophy seeped into Mark's bones like cold from the Alberta winter. It became the bedrock of everything he would accomplish. As a teenager, Mark Messier was not a typical hockey prodigy. He did not fit the mold of the slight, quick, dazzling young player who captures attention through finesse. He was big for his age, certainly. He would eventually stand 6 feet 1 inch and weigh 210 pounds, with a physical presence that was impossible to ignore in any room or on any rink. His shoulders were broad, his arms were thick, his jaw was set in a way that suggested permanent determination. But he was not a beautiful skater. He was not graceful in the manner of the sport's most elegant practitioners. He was powerful. There is a crucial difference between those two words. Grace suggests ease, fluidity, an absence of visible effort. Power suggests effort harnessed and directed with relentless purpose. Messier's skating stride was distinctive from an early age, a wide driving motion that generated enormous speed and even more force. His legs churned like pistons. His center of gravity was low and stable. When he hit an opponent, that opponent stayed down. When he came at a defenseman with the puck, the defenseman had two choices: get out of the way or go to the ice. There was no third option. At the age of 17, in 1978, Messier made a decision that would have been unthinkable for most players his age. He joined the Indianapolis Racers of the World Hockey Association, a rival league to the NHL that operated from 1972 to 1979. The WHA was a rough, unpolished league, born from a desire to break the NHL's monopoly on professional hockey. It attracted aging veterans seeking one last payday and young players seeking a chance they might have waited years for in the NHL system. The hockey was fast, but the accommodations were Spartan, the travel was grueling, and the future of the league was always uncertain. Messier played only 5 games for Indianapolis before being sent to the Cincinnati Stingers, where he appeared in 47 games. He was a boy among men, a 17-year-old competing against grown adults in a league that had few rules about physicality and even fewer protections for teenagers. He scored only 1 goal that season, 1 goal in 52 total games. By conventional measures, it was forgettable. But Messier was not measuring himself conventionally. He was measuring himself by whether he survived, and he survived. He learned what it felt like to be hit by men twice his age. He learned what it meant to compete when no one was going to protect you. He learned that professional hockey was not a game for boys. It was a game for men who had made their peace with pain. When the WHA folded after the 1978-79 season, 4 of its teams were absorbed into the NHL. One was the Edmonton Oilers. Messier was selected by Edmonton in the 3rd round of the 1979 NHL entry draft, the 48th pick overall. Not a first-round pick. Not a prospect anyone was building a franchise around. What the scouts could not measure was the fire inside him. That would reveal itself soon enough. He joined a team assembling one of the most remarkable collections of talent in hockey history. Because in Edmonton, playing alongside Messier, was Wayne Gretzky. Gretzky is, and will likely always be considered the greatest hockey player of all time. His numbers are so far beyond what anyone else achieved that they seem almost fictional. And in the early 80s, he was the center of the hockey universe, a slight, almost frail-looking player who saw the ice differently than anyone before or since. Gretzky was the artist. Messier was the warrior. Gretzky made the Oilers great. Messier made them tough. Together, they were unstoppable. The Oilers' rise was meteoric. They went from expansion upstarts to legitimate contenders in just a few years, playing a brand of hockey that was exhilarating and reckless in equal measure. But they learned hard lessons. In the 1983 playoffs, the Oilers were swept by the New York Islanders in the Stanley Cup Final. The Islanders, winners of 4 consecutive cups, taught the young Oilers what championship hockey demanded. Messier has spoken about walking past the Islanders' dressing room after the final game and seeing a team not celebrating but recovering, battered, bruised, wrapped in ice, and victorious. That image burned into his memory. That was the price of the cup. He was willing to pay it. The following season, 1983-84, the Oilers won their first cup, defeating the Islanders in 5 games. Messier won the Conn Smythe Trophy with 8 goals and 18 assists in 19 games. He was 23. The dynasty had begun. They won again in 85, again in 87, again in 88, 4 cups 5 years. And through it all, Messier was the emotional centre. His eyes, pale and piercing, became the most feared sight in the league. They called him the Moose. When he was coming at you, you felt like you were standing in front of a freight train. And it gets harder. In August of 1988, Gretzky was traded to the Los Angeles Kings. The trade shook Canada. People wept. The government discussed intervening. The greatest player in history was gone, and the Oilers were supposed to crumble. This was the moment that revealed who Messier truly was. Named captain, he led the Oilers back to the Cup Final in 1990. They defeated Boston in 5 games, Edmonton's 5th Cup, Messier's Cup. He won the Hart Trophy that season with 45 goals and 84 assists. But beyond the numbers, it was his presence that defined the run. He was everywhere, in every battle, on every critical shift, leading from the front. The Edmonton years were extraordinary. 5 cups, a Conn Smythe, a Hart Trophy. But Edmonton was only the first act. By the early 90s, contract disputes led to his departure. On October 4th, 1991, Messier was traded to the New York Rangers. He arrived to a franchise that had not won the Cup since 1940. 51 years. The team had talent. Mike Richter in goal, Brian Lech on defense, Adam Graves up front. But they had no leader, no one who could look at half a century of losing and see opportunity rather than doom. Messier brought certainty, not hope, certainty. He had won 5 cups. He knew the taste of victory and the cost of earning it. His first order of business was changing the culture, stripping away the loser's identity, making everyone understand that winning was not a dream but an expectation. The transformation took time. Playoff losses to Pittsburgh in 92, an early exit in 93. But Messier persisted. The Rangers hired Mike Keenan, a volatile but effective coach. They added key pieces, and in 1993-94, they posted the league's best record: 52 wins, 24 losses, 8 ties, 112 points. Messier had 47 goals and 84 assists for 131 points at age 33. But regular season dominance is nothing in hockey without a postseason to match. But here is what makes this story unforgettable. The 1994 playoff run did not begin with the guarantee. It did not begin with champagne and confetti. It began with doubt. Because for all their regular season dominance, the Rangers were a team haunted by their own history. And the hockey world watched, waiting to see if this year would be different, or if it would be the same story retold in more painful form. The first round matched the Rangers against the New York Islanders, their crosstown rivals, who despised them with the kind of purity that only geographic proximity can produce. The Islanders were not a great team that season. They had finished far below the Rangers in the standings. But rivalries have their own physics. The series went to 7 games. 7 games against an inferior opponent. The Rangers won, but the struggle revealed a vulnerability that worried observers. If they could barely survive the Islanders, how would they handle what lay ahead? Messier was not concerned with outside opinion. Inside the locker room, he saw something that mattered more than statistics or odds. He saw a team beginning to believe, not because they had won easily, but because they had won hard. Winning hard, he knew from Edmonton, was how championship teams were forged. Easy victories teach nothing. Hard victories teach everything. The second round brought the Washington Capitals, led by Peter Bondra and goaltender Don Beaupre. Washington took Game 1, punching the Rangers in the mouth and establishing that this would not be a comfortable series. But the Rangers responded with the resilience Messier had been building for 3 years. They won 3 consecutive games and closed the series in 5. The margins were thin in every contest. Every shift felt consequential. Every goal felt enormous. But the Rangers survived and they advanced. And then came the Eastern Conference Final against the New Jersey Devils. This was the series that defined the 1994 playoffs. This was the crucible that forged the legend. The Devils were coached by Jacques Lemaire, a brilliant defensive tactician who had perfected a system known as the neutral zone trap. The trap was designed to slow down high-scoring teams, to clog the middle of the ice and force turnovers to transform hockey from a game of speed and creativity into a game of patience and suffocation. It was the antithesis of what the Rangers wanted to do, and it was devastatingly effective. The trap turned high-event hockey into low-event hockey, and in low-event hockey, the team with superior defensive structure usually wins. The Devils won Game 1, then Game 2. The Rangers found themselves in a 2-0 deficit, and the narrative that had been building all season erupted to the surface. The curse was too strong. Messier could not break it. No one could. The New York tabloids, never gentle, began composing obituaries in bold type. Fans began preparing for another summer of regret. The Rangers rallied. They won Games 3 and 4 at home, evening the series. Then the Devils won Game 5 and took the series lead, 3-2. One more New Jersey victory, and the Rangers' season was over. One more loss and 53 years became 54. This is when Mark Messier made his guarantee. On the morning of Game 6, speaking to reporters at the team hotel, he declared that the Rangers would win that night. The exact phrasing has been debated for decades. The precise words matter less than the meaning, which was unmistakable. He was not expressing hope or offering encouragement. He was making a promise, a guarantee backed by his reputation, his pride, and every championship ring on his fingers. The promise landed like a thunderclap. Teammates were alternately energized and anxious. The media was stunned. The Devils were publicly dismissive but privately unsettled. Game 6 was played on May 25, 1994, at the Meadowlands Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey. For 2 periods, it looked like the guarantee would become the greatest embarrassment of Messier's career. The Devils controlled play. They executed their trap to perfection. New Jersey built a 2-1 lead heading into the 3rd period, and the clock was ticking down. The guarantee was dying. And then Mark Messier decided the game would not end the way everyone expected. He decided it with his body, his stick, and his will. He scored the tying goal early in the 3rd period, a powerful drive that changed the building's energy. Then he scored again to give the Rangers the lead. And then, on the power play, he completed the hat trick. 3 goals in the final period of an elimination game. 3 goals born not of fortunate bounces or defensive breakdowns, but of pure, concentrated determination. The Rangers added an empty net goal to win 4-2. The guarantee was fulfilled, and Mark Messier entered a realm of sporting mythology reserved for a handful of figures across all of athletics. The numbers are striking. 3 goals in a single period when the season was ending. A natural hat-trick on the road in the most pressurized environment imaginable. Messier did not score those goals because the Devils made mistakes. He scored them because he refused, at the most fundamental level of his being, to allow his season to end. He took the game by the throat and bent it to the outcome he had promised. Those who watched it live describe witnessing something beyond normal athletic performance. Something that suggested the existence of forces in competition that no analytic model can capture. Game 7 was played 2 nights later at Madison Square Garden. The fear was that the Rangers would be emotionally spent after Game 6. The game validated that fear for long stretches. It went to double overtime, the tension building until it felt like a physical substance pressing down on everyone in the building. And then Stéphane Matteau, a forward acquired at the trade deadline for exactly these moments, scored on a wraparound that sent Madison Square Garden into the most explosive celebration in its history. The Rangers had won the series, 4-3. They were going to the Stanley Cup Final. The final matched them against the Vancouver Canucks, led by Pavel Bure, the Russian Rocket, one of the fastest and most electrifying players of his generation. Bure could take the puck behind his own net and, in a blur of acceleration, be scoring at the other end before the defense could react. The Canucks also had Trevor Linden, their captain, a player of profound character who would push the Rangers to their absolute limit. The Rangers won the first 2 games at home. They won Game 3 on the road. They led 3-1. One more victory and the cup was theirs. The city held its breath. And then, in a development that felt cruelly scripted by the hockey gods themselves, the Canucks came back. They won Game 5 in New York. They won Game 6 in Vancouver. The series was tied at 3 games apiece. Another Game 7. Another do-or-die game. and all the old ghosts, all the old fears, came rushing back from every dark corner of the franchise's memory. Game 7 of the 1994 Stanley Cup Final was played on June 14th at Madison Square Garden. The atmosphere defied description. Every seat occupied, every inch of standing room claimed. The air vibrated with a combination of desperate hope and existential dread. The Rangers won. The final score was 3-2. Brian Leetch, who won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP, was magnificent. Adam Graves scored a crucial goal. Mike Richter made save after save. But it was Messier who held the team together through every wobble, every shift of momentum, every surge of panic that threatened to unravel 54 years of waiting. When the final horn sounded, Madison Square Garden erupted in a release of emotion that had been building for more than half a century. Players poured onto the ice. Messier embraced Richter, then Leetch, then everyone within reach. And when the Stanley Cup was carried to center ice, it was Messier who lifted it first. He raised it over his head, his face twisted with joy and relief and exhaustion and something that looked like disbelief. He skated a lap around the rink, the cup above him, the crowd screaming his name and crying and holding each other. It was not merely a hockey victory, it was an exorcism. 54 years of ghosts, banished in one night. The ticker tape parade through the Canyon of Heroes in Lower Manhattan drew an estimated 1.5 million people. 1.5 million. For a hockey parade, in a city that had celebrated champions in every other sport. But this one was different. The wait had been too long, the relief was too deep. The man who had ended it was too singular. Beyond the 1994 run, other moments shaped the Messier legend. The 1987 Canada Cup, where he represented his country alongside Gretzky against the formidable Soviet national team in a legendary 3-game final, produced some of the finest international hockey ever played. Messier was a dominant force, playing with a physicality and purpose that overwhelmed world-class opponents. There was the 1990 Cup run in Edmonton, where Messier played through a devastating knee injury sustained in the conference semifinals against the Los Angeles Kings. The injury was severe enough that most players would have missed the rest of the postseason. Messier missed one game. He returned for Game 5, played through pain that would have been disabling for most humans, and led the Oilers to victory. He then continued, playing through the conference finals and the cup final, winning the championship while unable to practice between games due to the severity of his condition. When asked about it afterward, Messier shrugged. The team needed him. That was the entire explanation. The team needed him, so he played. It was that simple. It was that brutal. It was that Messier. Then came the complicated chapters. His departure from New York after the 1996-97 season, driven by a contract dispute with Rangers management. His signing with the Vancouver Canucks as a free agent, a 3-year stretch that produced declining numbers, missed playoffs, and a relationship with the city of Vancouver that deteriorated into something toxic, and his return to New York in 2000 at age 39 for 4 final seasons that were marked by diminished production but undiminished intensity. He still hit, he still competed, he still led, and when he retired after the 2003-2004 season at age 43, he did so as the second highest scorer in NHL history with 1,887 career points, having played 1,756 regular season games, then the most in league history. His jersey retirement ceremony on January 12, 2006, at Madison Square Garden was deeply emotional. Number 11 rose to the rafters. Former teammates returned. The crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted minutes. And Messier, the man who had never flinched in the face of elimination, who had guaranteed victories and delivered them, who had played through injuries that defied medical logic, stood at center ice and wept openly. It was a rare, deeply moving display of vulnerability from a man who had built his entire career on the projection of invincibility. There is a version of Mark Messier's story that is clean and heroic, the great leader, the guarantee, the cup, the tears of joy. It is a beautiful story, and it is true, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is more complicated, more human, and ultimately more compelling than any mythology. The first thing you need to understand about Messier the man is that he was not universally beloved. He was respected, he was feared, he was admired. But beloved is a different word. It implies warmth, approachability, a gentleness that Messier did not always project. He was demanding in a way that could be brutal. He held teammates to standards that many could not reach, and when they fell short, his disappointment was neither hidden nor softened. A glance from Messier across the locker room could make a professional athlete feel small in ways that lingered for years. He did not suffer weakness. He did not tolerate excuses, and he did not modulate his expectations to accommodate the limitations of those around him. He expected everyone to give what he gave, and what he gave was everything. There are stories from former teammates that illuminate both sides of this dynamic. Some describe his influence as the most important experience of their professional lives. Adam Graves has spoken about how playing with Messier made him a better player and a better person. The fear of disappointing Mark Messier was, for many teammates, a more powerful motivator than any coach's speech or any financial incentive. To stand beside him was to be held to a standard you did not know you could reach, and then to reach it, and then to discover the standard had been raised again. But other former teammates describe something different. A locker room where younger players were afraid to speak, where the hierarchy was rigid and enforced through dominance rather than encouragement, where a single cutting remark from the captain could damage a young player's confidence in ways that took months to repair. The intensity that elevated veterans sometimes overwhelmed those still finding their footing. This is not a contradiction of the heroic story. It is a complication. Great leaders are rarely gentle. The qualities that enable someone to carry a team through the fire often include a hardness that is uncomfortable to witness in calmer moments. Let that sink in. The same force of personality that produced the guarantee and the hat trick, the same intensity that allowed him to play through injuries that would hospitalize ordinary people, the same will that shattered a 54-year curse, had a cost. It cost the players who could not handle it. It cost relationships that might have survived a softer approach. Leadership at the level Messier practiced it is not kindness. It is will, and will does not accommodate the feelings of those it pushes aside. There is also the matter of his physical style of play. Messier was, by honest accounting, one of the most punishing players in NHL history. His elbows were legendary, and not always favourably. He was fined and suspended multiple times for elbowing opponents, for delivering blows that were aimed high, that caused injuries beyond what the normal violence of the game produces. He played in an era when such tactics were more tolerated, but the fact remains that his dominance was achieved partly through a willingness to inflict pain that occasionally exceeded what even the permissive standards of his era considered acceptable. This does not diminish his achievements. It contextualizes them within the framework of a real human being rather than an airbrushed legend. And then there is Vancouver. The 3 seasons Messier spent with the Canucks remain the most complicated chapter of his story. He signed a lucrative contract, reportedly worth approximately $30 million over 5 years. He was given the captaincy, which meant that Trevor Linden, one of the most beloved players in franchise history, was stripped of the C. The move was deeply unpopular. Linden was a local hero. Messier was the man most associated with the team that had crushed Vancouver's dreams in the 1994 final. Giving him the captaincy felt like an insult to everything the franchise valued. The team declined. Messier's production dropped. The Canucks missed the playoffs every season he was there, and the relationship between Messier and Vancouver deteriorated into something bitter. Fans did not merely dislike him, they reviled him. Decades later, he remains the most unpopular player in Canucks history. Surveys confirm it. The sentiment is real and enduring. Let that sink in. The greatest leader in hockey history, the man who broke the Rangers' curse, who guaranteed a victory and delivered a hat trick to keep the promise, that man is still actively despised in an entire NHL city. Vancouver is a humbling reminder that legends are not immune to failure, that the same personality that conquers one challenge can be entirely wrong for another. Messier's leadership, perfect for a Rangers team needing championship certainty, was toxic for a Canucks team needing patience and development. He could not or would not adapt. Either way, it was a failure, and it belongs to his story. Beyond hockey, Messier the private man was exactly that, private. He did not seek the spotlight when the jersey came off. He was not a fixture on celebrity circuits or gossip pages. He valued family. His father, Doug, remained an advisor and confidant throughout his career. In retirement, he has been involved in business and charitable work, served as an NHL ambassador, and spoken about the importance of youth hockey. But he has not pursued constant visibility. He has receded into a life lived largely outside public view, with the same quiet determination that marked his playing career. The deeper truth is that Mark Messier was human, magnificently, frustratingly, contradictorily human. He could inspire a team to the impossible and alienate an entire city through the same force of personality. He was a 6-time champion and a 3-time participant in seasons that went nowhere. He played with a ferocity that changed games, and occasionally with a recklessness that crossed lines. The mythology strips away these complications, the truth restores them. And the truth makes Messier more compelling than any myth ever could, because the truth contains the full weight of what it means to be extraordinary and flawed at the same time. What does Mark Messier mean to hockey? The question seems simple, but the real answer spirals outward in every direction, touching every corner of the sport and reaching into questions that go beyond hockey altogether. He means leadership. That is the first and most obvious answer. When coaches at every level of the game talk about what it means to wear the C, they talk about Messier. Not as one example among many, as the example. The Mark Messier Leadership Award ensures that his name remains permanently linked to the concept. Other trophies honor statistical achievement. Messier's trophy honors character. That distinction says everything. He means toughness, not just the physical variety, though he had that in abundance. Mental toughness, the toughness to guarantee a victory with your career on the line. The toughness to play through injuries that should have been disqualifying. The toughness to walk into a locker room steeped in 5 decades of losing and declare that the losing stops now. Messier showed that toughness and skill are not trade-offs. They can coexist. And when they do, the result transcends either quality alone. He means the bridge between eras. 25 seasons, 1,756 regular season games. A career that began in 1979 and ended in 2004, spanning the Oilers dynasty, the dead puck era, and the dawn of the modern speed game. He played against his elders in the 80s and against players young enough to be his children in the 2000s. Very few athletes in any sport have been relevant across such a vast span of time. His career was a living history of the NHL. There is a philosophical dimension to his legacy worth considering. In a sport increasingly governed by analytics, by expected goals models and Corsi percentages and zone entry tracking, Messier's career is a reminder that some of the most important things in sports cannot be quantified. The impact of a captain walking into a room and making 20 men believe they are going to win, that has no data point. The value of a look in a player's eyes that tells his teammates the night will be different. That cannot be modelled. Messier's legacy is, in part, a defence of the intangible, a reminder that sports are played by humans and the human elements, will, courage, leadership, are as real as any statistic. He means the Oilers dynasty and the Rangers' redemption. 2 chapters, 2 legacies, each sufficient on its own for a Hall of Fame career. To have been central to both, separated by thousands of miles and a decade, is a testament to his adaptability, his longevity, and his understanding of what teams need. When the Hockey Hall of Fame inducted him in 2007, it was a formality. No debate, no deliberation. First year of eligibility. His speech was calm, measured, emotional in the way only Messier could manage. A final reminder of who he was. A man who understood the weight of the game and carried it willingly for 25 years. Time has not diminished his place. If anything, the passage of years has clarified it. The game has changed. Players are faster, training is more scientific, strategy is more sophisticated. But the fundamental truth that Messier embodied, that winning requires something beyond talent, something that lives in the heart rather than the hands, that truth has not changed and never will. Every young captain who puts on the sea for the first time is, whether he knows it or not, trying to live up to a standard that Mark Messier set. Most will fall short. That is not their failure. It is the measure of how high the standard was raised. Close your eyes and imagine the ice. It is June of 1994. The air inside Madison Square Garden is electric with 54 years of longing. The final horn has just sounded. The New York Rangers have won the Stanley Cup, and Mark Messier is standing at center ice, the trophy in his hands. The crowd roaring like a living thing, the weight of more than half a century of waiting lifted at last. In that moment, everything converges. The boy from St. Albert who learned to skate on frozen Alberta ponds while his father coached from the boards. The teenager who played professional hockey in the WHA before he could legally vote. The young man who stood in Wayne Gretzky's shadow and forged an identity so powerful that the shadow could not contain him. The captain who took over when Gretzky departed and proved that the Oilers could win without the greatest player in history. The leader who came to New York and looked at 51 years of failure and saw not a curse but a dare. The man who guaranteed a victory in an elimination game and then delivered the most famous hat-trick in the history of the sport. All of it led to this single image, this trophy, this night, this roar that shakes the building. Mark Messier was not the most talented player in NHL history. He was not the fastest. He was not the most skilled. He was not the most graceful. Gretzky was more productive by a margin that resists meaningful comparison. Bobby Orr was more revolutionary. Mario Lemieux was more naturally gifted. But Messier was something none of them were, at least not to the same degree. He was the most essential. The player you wanted, when the game was on the line, when the season was on the line, when everything you had worked for hung by a thread. The player who made other players better not through passing or vision, but through presence, through intensity, through an absolute refusal to accept any outcome other than victory. The word that keeps returning is captain, not as a title, as an identity. Messier did not merely wear the C, he was the C. Everything he did was filtered through his understanding of what leadership meant. To go first, to absorb the hardest hits, to demand more from yourself than from anyone else, to carry the weight when no one else can. There will be other great leaders, but there will never be another Mark Messier. The circumstances that created him, dynasty in Edmonton, drought in New York, Gretzky's shadow, Gretzky's departure, the guarantee, the hat trick, the cup after 54 years, those will never align again. He was a product of his talent and his times and his challenges, and the way he met those challenges with a ferocity that bordered on the primal will never be replicated. He is older now. The body that terrorized opponents has slowed. The eyes that made grown men flinch are gentler, but the legacy endures, in the names on the cup, in the award that bears his name, in the memories of teammates who still speak of him with awe and gratitude and, yes, a little fear, in the hearts of Rangers fans who remember exactly where they were when the curse was broken, who can still hear the crowd, who can still see Messier skating with the cup overhead, his face twisted with every emotion a human being can contain. He was not perfect. He was human, flawed and fierce, and sometimes too intense for his own good. He failed in Vancouver. He alienated some who crossed his path. He played on edges that, in a different era, would have drawn harsher judgment. But he also did what almost no one in the history of professional sports has ever done. He walked into a city that had been waiting for a miracle for more than half a century and delivered that miracle not through luck, not through circumstance, through will, through leadership, through the absolute conviction that losing was not an option. That is what Mark Messier means. When the ice is cold and the lights are bright and the stakes are impossibly high, when every instinct says to protect yourself, to play it safe, to accept the odds, there is a voice that says no, not tonight. Tonight we win. That voice belongs to Mark Messier. It will echo through arenas and memories and the history of hockey for as long as the game is played. Somewhere, in a quiet room in the Hockey Hall of Fame, the Stanley Cup sits on its pedestal, its silver surface gleaming under soft lights. And if you look closely, if you trace the names engraved on its bands with careful fingers, you will find him there. Mark Messier, 6 times over, the captain who promised a cup, and who kept his promise,